So I run a team that interfaces with the federal government, DoD, IC, on issues of technology, national security, and how things can be used for good and for bad. Spent 20 years with the federal government. I'll come back to that in a couple minutes. But today, I want to talk a little bit about recent advances in AI and some considerations for your community, for the Homeland Security community. This is going to be a very top-level sort of discussion, and in many ways, it meshes very well with the previous one, and I really thank you for that. I'm not going to have the cool graphics, but I will say that I found it interesting that in the poll, the differential between number 2 and number 3 wasn't as great as I had expected it to be. And I'm going to attribute that to the fact we have practitioners in the room. And many of you understand what happens when technology is used in ways that it's not really intended to be used, or it's used by people who don't have either the education or the maturity to use it well, and as a result, bad things can happen. And I'll go into some of those and really some of the ways we're thinking about dealing with them as technology develops. I'm going to do an audible. I spent the last hour, for those of you who weren't in the room, you missed out. We had a nice conversation about what AI-enabled GPT models can do in the current iteration. So I'm going to pull that off of my slides and not talk about that right now. I will wrap up my conversation, though, talking about some of the ways we see AI being used that will affect your jobs, affect Homeland Security. And you'll note that I'm not just going to be talking about all the great things that AI is going to be able to do. I'm going to be talking about some of the negative things. Fortunately, there are controls that are being developed. There are policy controls, there are technology controls, but the most important control that I'm going to spend most of my time talking about is this approach to an educated information consumer, the maturity and the rules and policies that society needs to be talking through in order to responsibly integrate this tool into everything that we do, from our families to our education to our offices, and then operationally out in the field. Now, why at Microsoft? Why is it that we are taking this on so strongly? Well, we feel that we are really at an inflection point for technology. We feel that AI, and not just our technology, but other technologies that are being developed around the world, are going to inherently change the way humans deal with technology. The conversational interfaces that AI is going to be able to, that it already is bringing forward for the internet, is changing the way that people with disabilities are able to access the internet, that people today can go across multiple data sets and find conclusions which are not necessarily intuitive. And we're only going to be seeing more and more of these possibilities as we move forward. Now, Microsoft itself feels that, well, you can read it for yourself. We're involved with making some of the coolest technology out there. This technology is changing the world. Now, when you're making such technology, we feel that we have a responsibility to be involved with how that technology is actually being implemented. Brad Smith is the president of the company. He's been with Microsoft for 30 years. Carol Ann Brown is his chief of staff, both absolute rock stars, some of the nicest people, Midwesterners, some of the nicest people that you'll ever meet in your life. And this is the reason, not this book, I don't get any royalties off the book, it's a good book, but the principle behind this book is really why I'm at Microsoft. Technology is inherently neutral. It can be used for good, it can be used for bad. It's how you use it and the sorts of rules that your society determines for its use that makes the difference. As I said, I spent 20 years with the federal government. The last 10 years of that time, I was learning how authoritarian states use technology. And that's why I'm at Microsoft, because if we don't seize this for ourselves, if we don't make our rules, if we don't go home and teach our families and our communities about the good and the bad, then some of the bad's going to be a little bit more than it needs to be. So I admit, I am taking this as an opportunity. I've got leaders in this room in all of your communities, in your families, in your offices, in your governments. And what I'm going to do over the next few minutes is share with you Microsoft's ideas on responsible AI. This is why we do responsible AI. We have a whole office now. Now I'm going to talk about what we're doing. The world today, as I've already talked about, AI is really rolling out quickly. And you're going to be seeing more and more products from us and from our competitors over the coming months that I can't talk about today, but they're really exciting things. You're also going to see authoritarian states roll out their versions of AI in the coming months. In fact, our coming out with our partnership with OpenAI has sped up, we think, some other countries' development and release of their own versions. They're going to operate under very different rules and constraints. Now, in the United States and in Western powers, companies and government agencies are already thinking through how we're going to be using AI more and more in both our office to reduce some of the drudgery work that we all have to do to get our work done, but also operationally and helping to facilitate decision-making on things that could be very consequential for the life and safety, especially in this room, the life and safety of the people that we work with. Now, as society is beginning to see this kind of roller coaster accumulate down the track, their expectations are changing. Concerns are being expressed. Schools are putting rules against the use of ChatGPT in the classroom. Governments, as a result, are beginning to treat AI in different ways. At the state level, the local level, the national level, regulations are coming up. And frankly, at Microsoft, we think that's entirely responsible. What we're trying to do is share our learnings, our experience, to make sure that those regulations and those policies don't repress innovation. They stimulate innovation, but also control the way AI is used, so it's being used responsibly. So we, starting in 2018, began to develop a series of principles. I am sharing these specifically because I hope that you'll find something in there that you find interesting for your own lives and your own potential applications. These aren't gospel, and I'm happy to shoot people to the website. This is all online. In fact, much more detail is online than I'm going to be able to talk about today. These aren't gospel. These are our ideas and our experiences after 5 years, 6 years of thinking through both the good and the bad of our AI-enabled tools. Across the top, we have the specific attributes. These are not laws. These are not rules. These are the principles upon which we think AI should operate. So these are not intended to restrict people's innovation. These are intended to make sure that we don't unnecessarily hurt folks through the use of our tools. And again, this is our responsibility as Microsoft, as the developer and deployer of this particular set of tools. And we want to make this information available to everybody who's got to think about this for their own families and for their own offices. First one is fairness. You got two very different people inputting the same sort of information into an AI-enabled model. The model should be spitting out the same thing. It shouldn't discriminate because of some other non-relevant factor. Second one is reliability and safety, which I expect is going to be fairly important for everybody in this room. In a different life, I was at the Department of Commerce, and I think there might be some FirstNet folks in the room. Anybody from FirstNet here? I know that. Yep. And one of the things that was drummed into me, at that point I was working on 5G and advanced telecommunications, and they said to me, Blair, it's fantastic, everything that you're trying to make available, but if our comms don't work in a crisis situation, we don't care, right? We don't care that you got drones that can put sensors overhead. We want to make sure that we can talk to the guy down the street who's trying to put out a fire. So you need to make sure that your comms are good first. Same thing has to happen with our AI-enabled models. You know, we talked about how they're trained. They're trained on scenarios. They're trained on data. We can't be in a situation where our AI-enabled models are exposed to a scenario that they weren't trained on and they don't reliably and safely respond in those untrained scenarios. And we are working on that. We've come a long way, and these new models go a long way toward that. On the privacy and security, all that data underlying AI models has PII in it. It's got stuff in there we don't want to get out. So we need to make sure that as we're using AI-enabled models, it protects the privacy of the people whose data are underlying it, and it doesn't generate conclusions that put in jeopardy the privacy of other people. And finally, inclusiveness. We believe very strongly that everybody should have access to information. So we have a whole part of Microsoft that's focused specifically on accessibility. We believe that AI needs to be developed in ways that allow everybody to be able to access it. Underneath these are two cross-cutting principles, transparency and accountability. Transparency, if you're using an AI-enabled model, you need to know that. We think it's only responsible that you, as users of these models, know when AI is involved. And that's good for a variety of reasons, but for us, the top one is you can't be sure that those top 4 principles are being achieved if you don't know you're using an AI model, right? You can't be sure that there's not some sort of a problem that the AI model is generating if you don't know you're using an AI model. So there needs to be transparency in the use of these models. Finally, accountability. We believe, as I said before, those of us who develop and deploy these AI-enabled models need to be accountable to the users, to our partners, to governments, and to ourselves for their development and for their use. But that accountability doesn't stop with just us. We are, in our world, in our corporate world, that is our focus, but that accountability goes to the user of the system as well. Each one of you has a weighty job. If you're going on to an AI-enabled model and you're pulling information off and you're not double-checking it and you're going out and you're making decisions, that's on you in some ways. You need to take that step to confirm the information before you use it operationally. And that goes to my kids. I talked about that earlier. My 14-year-old asked me if he could use GPT for school. I'm like, sure, you go ahead. But if you turn it in as it puts out, you're going to get a C. And if you get a C, you're certainly not doing the things you want to do this weekend. So you might want to take a look at what it is, make sure it's in your voice, that the facts are correct, and it answers the question that you put into it. Because sometimes you might think you're asking very clear questions of this AI-enabled model, but because it's probabilistic, what it interprets and what it spits back may not be what you intended. These are the principles that we use internally to Microsoft. Again, take these if you want, modify them for your own internal use, for your offices, for your own local and state governments. But there needs to be a governance structure underlying using all of these principles to feed into the tools themselves. There needs to be rules imposed into the internal implementation process. Then there needs to be training and principles for your internal and for us, external partners. Why do I say this? We produce these models. We also produce training modules to ensure that our partners understand the importance of keeping the human at the center. It's not just an internal to Microsoft training process. It is an external partner training process so they understand our view on vulnerabilities and responsibility. And finally, tools and processes. So these are the actual ways that we track, we implement all of the principles that we have underlying them. All right, now the little bit more interesting things perhaps. I spent a lot of time talking about that because really, guys, we're at an inflection point. I think that's been said a couple times, where we have an opportunity to ensure that our society is as ready for these tools as it can be. These tools exist. AI exists. It's not going away. You know, if we don't do it in the United States with the rules and regulations and principles that we think underlie the sort of society that we want to hand on to the next generation, other countries will, other societies will. So it's best, we believe, that we all have a societal conversation from the individual decision maker at home all the way up to the president about how we're going to be using these models in every part of our lives. So what are some of the good ways and some of the bad ways that we see AI either influencing things today or in the future? So let's start with the good. It's always more fun. So these are some use cases that we have just kind of sat down and brainstormed. Some of these already exist. Some of them are in process. And I'll leave you to kind of read through them and try to think through how these sorts of ideas might apply to your own work and your own lives. Writing assistance for those who don't love to write, GPT can pop out a pretty quick draft of letters, of reports, of job summaries. Not, again, finished products, but can take 75% of the drudgery out of the initial writing. Code generation, I love this one because it can take natural language and convert it into code. So the top one here is on telemetry. You can take aircraft telemetry data, you can have the AI model change it into code, automatically drop it into a SQL database, and then use that for tracking and record keeping longer term. Then you can daisy chain that theoretically if you need to file forms, if you need to send information to the FAA. You can stack these AI-enabled tools in ways that dramatically increase the efficiency and speed of these tedious tasks. Reasoning over data goes into, you've got these large data sets, how do you build models on top of those data sets and operationalize them? And actually, that's one that I just want to stomp on for a second. The federal government's got classified computing capabilities. So it's got air-gapped computing capabilities for secret and top-secret data. It's got internet-connected capabilities for open source, all the way up to confidential. I see a future in which intelligence analysts are going to be able to combine those data sources and be able to use AI-enabled models to very quickly churn out first drafts of analytical products in almost real time. And for people like many of you in the room who have to make real-time decisions based upon the best data out there, this sort of an approach will get you, I can't give you a percentage, right? The percentages don't exist, but a much greater access to data that's been generated either by your colleagues, by folks across the country, or in the open source for you to be able to do your jobs. And then summarization, massive, massive data sets. Right now, none of the tools that I showed you allow you to upload, but we're moving very quickly to a point where you can easily scan in, decades and decades of tax forms, and summarize those, put them into data sets, draw conclusions on them, do forensics on things in ways that should dramatically speed up the work that you do today. I don't put up anything here on scenario planning. You can use GPT or AI-enabled capabilities to write scenarios for tabletop exercises and red teaming, all of which, and then you can join those to serious gaming capabilities using VR and AR. Really, the possibilities are, frankly, almost endless. And one of the ways that we come up with new ideas is having conversations like these, because each one of you has a particular view on your jobs. Once you begin to see some of the possibilities, just the top-level possibilities, we rely upon you to come back to us and give us ideas so we can help flesh them out with our engineers. Now, with everything good comes something bad. And tools, I'm a farmer, right? I've got a tractor at home. We've got horses. And I spend a lot of time teaching my kids how to drive my tractor. We move bales. This time of year, we're all out of square bales, so we use round bales. And I've taught them over time that if they put up the bale on its spear up high and you go around a corner, you're likely to dump the tractor over. Now, so it took a while, but now they can actually drive the tractor with their hay bale. But I had to teach them. They had to get that maturity in order to use that tool. Some of what you see up here are problems that can arise when people who don't have the maturity or the perspective use a tool which is highly nuanced and potentially can provide responses which are not comfortable to read. Some of these, however, are up here are when people purposely misuse the tool. It's like if you take my tractor and you run it into my barn, you're going to wreck my barn. That's on purpose. But then you can make a mistake, and the summarization down here is a mistake. AI can generate erroneous yet convincing answers. It was called hallucination earlier. I call it my 8-year-old problem. I love my 8-year-old. He reads voraciously, and he comes back with information which is completely false. But he's totally convinced that it's accurate, and I am half convinced talking to him that it's accurate. AI will do the same thing. So you've got to read through and make sure the information's correct. I tried to tee up a deepfake video. Were you able to find that one? Yeah? So I'm going to see if we can put up a deepfake video. This is reasoning over data. Deepfakes. Everybody know what a deepfake is? Anybody not know what a deepfake is? Okay, a deepfake is a situation where you use usually AI-enabled tools to generate something which looks completely real but is not. I know, sounds pretty straightforward. It used to be that was done using pretty unsophisticated capabilities. Now, just within Microsoft, we have the GPT-enabled ability to mimic voices. I didn't show you this, but I can write a speech in the voice of the president or in the voice of Hemingway. All right, could you pause it real quick? I just want to intro this. So this has been attributed to Russia. It was released in March of 2022. It did not have the deep fake moniker across the middle. This is Vladimir Zelensky, or supposed to be. He is announcing his surrender, or his country's surrender to Russia. And this came out in the middle of March when things were very, very tense and Russia was hoping to push Ukraine over the line into surrendering. So if you just hit play for me again, you can see if you look at it closely, this isn't real. Look at the way the face and the body are, it's pixelated. Zelensky's got great HD, it would never be this pixelated. Things aren't quite right. But this dropped on social media, and it just blew everything up. People weren't sure if it was real. They didn't know what was going on. You can stop it now. Thank you. And this provides an example, the best example so far of what can happen if an advanced state using advanced AI tools wants to change a narrative, and wants to change a narrative in a way that can't necessarily be predicted ahead of time. You can imagine a situation internationally when two countries are close to war, the societies are just on the edge, and something like that gets dropped with one world leader supposedly saying something inflammatory about the other. Societies can start rioting. Things can happen in ways that can very quickly get out of control. So the ability of AI-enabled tools to build things like deepfakes, like phishing operations, in much more nuanced ways. I've got a friend of mine who's in the financial services industry. She tells me that they've had to institute their own internal two-factor authentication because somebody got a hold of one of the voice simulation models, which you can use 3 seconds of voice. This is a Microsoft thing, and you can't access it unless you have a verified need to access it. I can't access it because I don't have a need to access it. But with 3 seconds of your voice, we can mimic anything you want to say. And somebody got a hold of one of these tools, got the voice of one of her bosses. On the phone, this boss supposedly told one of his subordinates to transfer $50,000 over to this account to pay something. It wasn't his voice at all. So now they have an internal two-factor authentication process by which if one of these operational commands is given, whether it's by email or by voice, there has to be a way to confirm it using a different mode of information. So these are all ways, just probably scraping the top, I'm afraid, that you all within the Homeland Security community need to be thinking through how AI might be used. We, as an American society, will have some rules and expectations around this tool. Not every country will. So as we're working through how we're going to deal with it constructively, we also have to think through ways that we can defend ourselves about its being used negatively.